Hello everyone, I hope you guys are doing great, and today we are going to discuss yet another test from College Board. Today we'll be discussing the third practice test forwarded by College Board, and in this video we are going to talk about the first module. So practice test 3 module 1, let's just dive right into it. So the first question, it says, in the early 1800s the Cherokee scholar 𝐂𝐨𝐽 created the first script or writing system for an indigenous language in the United States because it represented sounds of spoken Cherokee so accurately. His script was easy to learn and thus quickly achieved blank. Now we don't know what it achieved. By 1830, over 90% of the Cherokee people could read and write it. So if 90% of the people could read and write it, so it was basically famous. So it basically got acclaimed, right? It got acclaimed and people accepted it. So you'd need a word that it was widely known, or it was famous, or something like that. So it cannot be careful, unintended, or infrequent. It has to be widespread. So it achieved widespread use, right? So people started using it overall. 90% of them were using it, right? So this is the best answer for this question. Moving on to question number 2, it says, when Mexican American archaeologist Zelia Maria Magdalena Nuttall published her 1886 research paper on sculptures found at the ancient indigenous city of Teotihuacan in present-day Mexico, other researchers readily blank her work as groundbreaking. Now we don't know what they titled her work or what happened. If you read the next sentence, it says, this recognition. So this means the other researchers recognized her work, right? So you need a word that means, or that has to be close in meaning with the word recognize. So it cannot be ensured, it cannot be denied, and it cannot be underestimated. It has to be acknowledged, right? It has to be acknowledged. So they acknowledged her work as groundbreaking, and this recognition stemmed from her convincing blah blah blah. So the best answer for this question will become, as per the meaning of the passage, it will be option A. Moving on. So you all know at the start we have words in context questions. So for the first 5-6 questions we have to go on with words in context. Let's move on. It says, like other tribal nation, the Muscogee Creek Nation is self-governing. Its national council generates laws regulating aspects of community life such as land use and health care, while the principal, chief and cabinet officials blank those laws by devising policies and administering services in accordance with them. So there are two parts to it basically. The first part is about regulating and generating the laws, and the second one has to do with devising policies for administering the services, right? So the first one is generating the laws, the second one is executing them or implementing them. So you have to have a word that means executing or something near to it, right? So it cannot be presumed, it cannot be improvised, and it cannot be mimicked. It has to be implement. So they were basically executing the laws that were generated by the previous tribal nation. So that is how it worked. That is why the best answer for this question will be option A. Moving on, question number 5, it says, the artisans of Egan Ronwan Guild in Benin City, Nigeria, typically blank the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down through their families since the 13th century, but they don't strictly observe every tradition. For example, guild members now use air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows to help their heat forges, right? So we have to see what they are doing. If you look closely to the passage, it says that these are techniques that have been passed down through their families since the 13th century. So they are basically still holding on to them. So you need a word that means to hold on, right? So it cannot be experiment, it cannot be improve, it cannot be grapple with. Grapple is again to seize something, right? It has to adhere. So basically adhere is to stick to something, right? So sticking to something, holding on to something, it basically means the same. That is why the answer over here will be option B. Moving on to the next question, it says, the indigenous intercropping system known as the Three Sisters, maize, squash and beans, form an dash web of relation. Maize provides the structure on which the beans vines grow. The squash vines cover the soil, discouraging competition from weeds and the beans aid their two sisters by enriching the soil with essential nitrogen. So if you understand, or if you try to understand, when you're talking about web, it has to be complex. So you need a word that has to do, or that is closer to the word complex. It cannot be indecipherable, it cannot be ornamental, it cannot be obscure, it can be intricate. Intricate is something that is complex, something that is very detailed, something that has all the very nitty-gritties figured out. So the best answer over here will be option D. Now moving on to question number 6, it says some historians blank that late 19th and early 20th century households in the United States experienced an economy of scale when it came to food purchases. They assumed that large households spent less on food per person than did small households. Economist Trevin Logan showed, however, that a close look at the available data disproves this supposition. So basically, what they were doing is they were trying to guess, or they were trying to put a supposition. So this is a supposition, right? And you have a clear word that is referring to this blank made. So you have to have a word that is closer to the word guess or supposition, something like that. So it cannot be contrived questions or regretted. It has to be surmise. Surmise is to guess something. Surmise is to hypothesize something. So the best answer over here, it's going to be option A. Moving on. So the next question is again of vocabulary and words in context. The work of Kiowa painter T.C. Cannon derives its power in part from the tension among its blank influences. Now we don't know how were these influences. Classic European portraiture with its realistic treatment of faces, American pop art movement with its vivid color, and flat style, the intertribal painting style that rejects the effect of depth, typically achieved through shading and perspective. So we understand that they were different. So if you read all of these three, they are different, and you need a word in the blank that means different, right? So if you look at option A, it is complementary, it does not mean to differ. Unknown again does not mean to differ, and interchangeable again does not mean to differ. It's disparate, that means to differ, that has to be different. So the best answer over here will be option C. Moving on. So question number 8, we have new and interesting research conducted by Suleiman Al-Suwaidan and Muattal Haj is inspired by their observation that though there have been many studies of the effect of high altitude on blood chemistry, there is a blank studies of the effect on blood chemistry of living in location below the sea level, such as the California towns of Salton City and Sealy, right? So you have to see the nature of the word. So it says, if you look at it, though. So when you have though written, you need to understand that the two sentences have to have the opposites, right? Or they have to mean the opposite. So the first sentence says, there have been many studies of the effects of high altitude on blood chemistry. So if the first sentence is talking about many studies, right? So the second sentence, naturally, because of though, has to talk about something that is low in number. So when you talk about something that is low in number, it cannot be quarrel about, it cannot be profusion, and it cannot be verisimilitude. It has to be the paucity, right? So paucity basically is scarcity, right? Something is scarce, something is scarce. So it has to be the best answer over here in relation to the sentence that we have. Now moving on to the next question. We are done with the words in context. Now we are moving on to the main purpose question. Again, we are in the craft and structure. This is the main purpose question where you have to work out the central idea of the passage and you have to align it with the call to action, what it is asking you to do, and the combination of both of them becomes the answer of the main purpose question. So if you read this question now, this question says, the following text is from Sarah 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐧𝐭𝐚𝐜𝐭 1899 short story Martha's Lady. Martha is employed by Miss Payne as a maid. Miss Payne sat by the window watching, in her best dress, looking stately and calm. She seldom went out now, and it was almost time for the carriage. Martha was just coming in from the garden with the strawberries and with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. The golden robins sang in the elms, and the sun was going down behind the apple trees at the foot of the garden. The beautiful old house stood wide open to the long expected guest. Now, if you look at it, the main purpose looks to be that they are waiting for someone, because it clearly says that it stood open for the long expected guest, and all of the things that have been mentioned in the passage, they look to be the preparations for that visit, right? So if you look at option A, it says to convey the worries about a new guest. No, it's nothing about the worries. So it cannot be A, although it is about the new guest, but it's not about the worries. To describe how the characters have changed over time, no. Irrelevant. To contrast the activities indoors with the stillness outside, no. To depict the setting as the characters await a visitor's arrival, so yes, this has to be the best sentence. Now, you may be wondering that some of the information that we have in the options that we have not taken as the answer are there in the passage, but we have not taken it. So you have to understand that when you're talking about the main purpose question, you have to take the information that is there in the entire passage. So you have to talk about the conclusion of the passage, not only any particular detail that is there in the passage. So the main purpose is a combination of the main idea of the entire passage and the call to action. So the action that it is calling us to, right? Moving on to the next question. So it says, astronomers are confident that the star Betelgeuse will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. They are much less confident, however, about when this will happen, since that depend on internal characteristics of Betelgeuse that are largely unknown. So there's a star that might explode, they are confident about that, but when that will happen, they do not understand that, because it depends on some characteristics that are largely unknown. Astrophysicist Sarafina Al-Badri Nancy and colleagues recently investigated whether acoustic waves in the star could be used to determine internal stellar states, but concluded that this method could not sufficiently reveal Betelgeuse's internal characteristics to allow its evolutionary state to be firmly fixed. So again, after investigation, they were not able to find those internal characteristics so that they can fix that. So which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the text? So you have to talk about this sentence. This sentence basically talks about that we don't know, or we don't have any idea of when that supernova will happen, right? So that is what you have to take in the options. If you look at option A, it explains how the work of Nancy and colleagues was received by others in the field. No. It presents the central finding reported by Nancy and colleagues. No. It identifies the problem that Nancy and colleagues attempted to solve but did not. Yes, this is a problem, because they knew that this is an event that is going to eventually happen, but the problem is that they do not know, right? And eventually in the passage we understand that they weren't able to solve that. So this is a problem, that they did not understand what are the internal characteristics based on which that explosion might happen. So the best answer for this question will be option C. If you look at option D, it says it describes a serious limitation of the method used by Nancy and colleagues. So it's not the limitation of the method, it's the limitation of the finding. So we do not have the finding, the method is right, and even if it's wrong, it's not mentioned in the passage, right? So the best answer over here for question 10 will be option C. Moving on. So the next question, it says the following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor lives with her younger sister and mother, Mrs. Dashwood. Eleanor is this eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract to advantage of them all that eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart, her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters had resolved never to be taught. Now, she was someone who was younger as per the age, but again, she had that knowledge and wisdom that she was qualified to be the counselor of her mother. Eleanor, the question is asking, according to the text, what is true about Eleanor? So we have to talk about that quality. If you look at option A, it says Eleanor often argues with her mother but fails to change her mind. So it's not the argument. If she is the counselor of her mother, she is advising her, not arguing with her. Eleanor can be overly sensitive with regard to family matters. We don't know that. Eleanor thinks her mother is a bad role model. Again, if she is advising her mother, that does not mean that mother is a bad role model. Eleanor is remarkably mature for her age, right? So this is what the passage is all about. That what she's talking, what she's saying is remarkably mature for the age that she has. That is only 19. That is why the best answer for this question will be option D. Now let's move on to question number 12. It says, believing that living in an impractical space can heighten awareness and even improve health. Conceptual artist Madeline Gins and Shusaku Arakawa designed an apartment building in Japan to be more fanciful than functional. A kitchen counter in chest high on one side and knee high on the other. A ceiling has a door to nowhere. The effect is disorienting but invigorating. After 4 years there, filmmaker Nobu Yamakao reported significant health benefits. So there are many things that are of no use, but again, what we see is that it was invigorating. So with health, it was better. So let's look at that. The options. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? So we have to talk about the main idea. If you look at the options, although inhabiting a home surrounded by fanciful features such as those designed by Gins and Arakawa can be rejuvenating, it is unsustainable. Now it's nothing about the sustainability. The fact is that it was getting difficult for them, but it was invigorating nevertheless. So it has to be there. But it cannot be the answer. If you look at option B, it says designing disorienting spaces like those in Gins and Arakawa building is the most effective way to create physically stimulating environment. It's good and it's invigorating, but it's the most effective. Even if it's not mentioned in the passage. As a filmmaker, Yamaoka has long supported the designs of conceptual artists such as Gins and Arakawa. So again, this is not the main idea. Although impractical, the design of the apartment buildings by Gins and Arakawa may improve the well-being of buildings residents. So this is the well-being, that is the main idea of the sentence, of the passage. So that is why best answer over here will be option D. So although it was impractical and although it was different and unorthodox, but it had its own health benefits. That is what the passage is claiming. That is why we'll take option D as the answer, right? So moving on to the next question. It's question number 13. It says, in a research paper, a student criticizes some historians of modern African politics, claiming that they have evaluated Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, primarily as a symbol rather than in terms of his action. So it was not his action, it was just that he was a symbol. So he had no notable actions. That is what the passage is suggesting, and they just took him as a symbol of being a leader or something like that, right? So let's look at the options that can support the claim, because the question is saying which quotation from the work by a historian would best illustrate the student's claim. So if you look at option A, it says Lumumba is a difficult figure to evaluate due to the starkly conflicting opinions he inspired during his life and continues to inspire today. So this is again not the right answer. The available information makes it clear that Lumumba's political beliefs and values were largely consistent throughout his career. Even if they were, it's not there in the passage. It's about that he was not considered for his actions. He was considered just as a symbol. If you look at option C, it says Lumumba's practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It is mainly as the personification of Congolese independence that he warrants scholarly attention. So, passed over quickly, that means that they were not considered. They were not considered. What was considered was the fact that his personification of the Congolese independence that he warrants scholarly attention for. So the best answer over here will be option C. Let's move on. Now this is a command of evidence quantitative question. We have a graph that talks about percentage of Ondo State small scale farmer who are female by main crop grown. So we have the type of crop and then the percentage of female farmers that were there. So let's look at the passage and then see what the answer can be. Geographer Adebayo Olowolo and his colleagues surveyed small scale farmers in 3 locations in Ondo State, Nigeria, which has mountainous terrains in the north and urbanized center and coastal terrain in the south, to learn more about their practices like the types of crops they mainly cultivated. In some regions, female farmers were found to be specially prominent in cultivation for specific types of crops and even constituted majority of farmers who cultivated these crops. For instance, so we need an example. An example of what? That the female farmers were found to be specially prominent. So we need an example of a place where female farmers were prominent, so they were in majority, and they were cultivating a specific type of crop. So it has to be one crop, and it has to be majority of female farmers, right? So let's look at the options. The first option says which choice most effectively uses data from the graph to complete the example. Most of the farmers who cultivated cereals and most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in the South Ondo were women. So it's not true about the cereals. It's although true about the non-root vegetables, but it has to be about one crop. It cannot be about two crops, right? More women in central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereals. Again, it has to be about two crops, so it cannot be the answer. Most farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. So it's about North and South Ondo, right? And it's a particular region, and it is about one crop. So it's only north root vegetables, and if you look at it, it is in majority, so that is right. C will be your answer. A relatively equal proportion of women across three regions of Ondo mainly cultivated cereals. So again, this cannot be the answer. The best answer over here will be option C. Moving on. Given that stars and planets initially form from the same gas and dust in space, some astronomers have posited that host stars, such as the Sun, and their planets, such as those in our solar system, are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. This idea is also supported by evidence that rocky planets in our solar system are composed of some of the same materials as the Sun. So, what they're saying is that the amount, so basically the host star is larger or equal, right? So, this is what it said over here, that host stars and their planets are composed of the same material, with planet containing equal or smaller quantities of material that make up the host star. So it is equal or smaller quantities. So now it says which finding, if true, would most directly weaken. So over here it says equal or smaller quantities, so your answer should have equal or higher quantities. So if you look at the options, it says most stars made of hydrogen and helium, but when cooled they reveal contain small amounts of iron and silicate. No. A nearby host star is observed to contain same proportion of the hydrogen and helium as that of the Sun. No. Evidence emerges that amount of iron in some rocky planets is considerably higher than the amount in their host stars. So the passage is talking about smaller quantities, this is talking about higher quantity. That is why this will be the answer, because the question is asking us for something that would weaken the stance, right? So the best answer over here will be C, and D again will not be the answer. We are going to eliminate that as well. Moving on to question number 16. Question number 16, it says, in the 20th century, ethnographers made a concerted effort to collect Mexican American folklore, but they did not agree about the folklore's origin. So they were collecting it, but they were not agreeing about the origin. Scholars such as Aurelio Espinosa claimed that Mexican American folklore derived largely from the folklore of Spain, which ruled Mexico and what is now the southwestern United States from the 16th to early 19th centuries. Scholars such as Americano Paredes by contrast, argued that while some Spanish influence is undeniable, Mexican American folklore is mainly a product of ongoing interactions of various cultures in Mexico and United States. So what he's saying is, the first one was talking about that it was entirely a Mexican tradition, and the next one is Spanish tradition, and the second one is saying that some Spanish influence is there, but again mainly it's about Mexican and United States. So they are basically contradicting with each other. The question is saying which finding, if true, would most directly support Paradis's argument. So you need to understand that Paradis's argument is that it had a little bit of a Spanish influence, but mainly it was Mexican and United States. So if you look at this, the folklore that ethnographers collected included several songs written in the form of decima, a type of poem originating in late 16th century Spain. So this is not the answer. Much of the folklore that ethnographers collected has similar elements from region to region. Again, no. Most of the folklore that ethnographers collected was previously unknown to scholars. Again, not irrelevant. Most of the folklore that ethnographers collected consisted of corridos, ballads, about history and social lives of a clearly recent origin. So a recent origin means that it is related to Mexican United States, not the ancient Spanish one. So the best answer over here is going to be option D. Let's move on to question number 17. This is an inference question. When it says logically completes the sentence, it has to be an inference question. It says, in the early 19th century, some Euro-American farmers in the northeastern United States used agricultural techniques developed in the Haudenosaunee Iroquois people centuries earlier, but it seems that few of those farmers had actually seen Haudenosaunee farms firsthand. Barring the possibility of several farmers of the same era independently developing techniques that the Haudenosaunee people had already invented, these facts most strongly suggest. Now, basically, what they're saying is that if you look at the passage, it says that although they were using these techniques, they did not, learn these techniques directly from those people, the Haudenosaunee people, right? So if they did not learn from them directly, then they must have learned from people who were in direct influence of those people. That has to be the case, because other than that, there is no third option for it, right? So if you look at option A, it says those farmers learned the techniques from other people who were more directly influenced by Haudenosaunee practices. So this has to be the answer, and the best answer over here has to be option A. The other options are not talking about even how they learned those techniques, so obviously we are going to eliminate them. If you look at question number 18, it says, again this is an inference question, so we'll move on with it. It says, if some artifacts recovered from excavations of the settlements of Kolukata in modern Ghana date from the 13th century CE, that may lend credence to claims that the settlement was founded before or around that time. There is other evidence, however, strongly supporting a 14th century CE founding date for Kolokata. If both the artifacts date from the 14th century CE founding date are correct, that would imply that, now what he's trying to say over here, so if both of these dates are correct, so that means if this place was founded in the 14th century and the artifacts were discovered in the 13th century, that means for sure they were not discovered over here, they were discovered somewhere else, and then in the 14th century they got to that place in some way or the other. So if you look at option A, it says artifacts from the 14th century CE are more commonly recovered than artifacts from 13th century CE. So again, completely irrelevant. The artifacts originated elsewhere and eventually reached Kolokata through trade or migration. So this is the best answer, because obviously if the dates are different, then it has to be the reason, right? If dates are different and they're still there, so obviously definitely they were not excavated at that time, so they reached somewhere else, right? So the best answer over here is going to be option B. Moving on. So question number 19. A team of biologists led by Jai Hoon Jung, Antonio D. Barbosa, and Stephanie Houghton investigated the mechanism that allows Arabidopsis thaliana tailcrest plants to accelerate flowering at high temperatures. They replaced the protein ELF3 in the plants with a similar protein found in other species of streptobrom that, unlike A. thaliana, displays no acceleration in flowering with increased temperature. A comparison of unmodified A. thaliana plants with the altered plants showed no difference in flowering at 22 degrees Celsius, but at 27 degrees Celsius, the unmodified plants exhibited accelerated flowering while the altered ones did not, which suggests that, so it's the temperature that is causing the difference. So at one temperature you have that, and at the other temperature you don't have that. So that is what you have to understand and see how you have to go to it. So if there is increase in temperature 27 degrees Celsius, it is responding to it. If the temperature is relatively lower, it is not responding to it. So this is what you have to find in the option as well. Option A, temperature sensitive accelerated flowering is unique. Now we don't know if this is happening to it, but we don't have any information that tells us that it's only happening to this, right? So this will be incorrect. A. thaliana increases ELF3 production as temperature rises. Yes, this very well can, it is close to it. ELF3 enables A. thaliana to respond to increased temperature. So this is a better answer, because this is enabling A. thaliana, right? So it's not that A. thaliana is increasing ELF production, it's the ELF3 that is enabling A. thaliana to increase temperatures, right? Temperatures of at least 22 degrees Celsius are required for, no, it's not, it's 27. So The best answer over here is going to be option C. So let's move on to question number 20. It says, a member of Cherokee Nations, Mary Golda Ross, is renowned for her contribution to NASA's planetary flight handbook, which blank details mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus. So if you look at it, this complete thing is going on in past. So you have to take a verb that is again in past. So it cannot be provided, providing, or to provide. And again, having provided, you don't have any evidence of this as well. So the best answer over here for simple past will be provided. So which provided detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus. So this will be the best answer over here. We have started with standard English conventions. Now look at question number 21. It says, typically underlines, scribbles and notes left in the margins by a former owner lowers a book's blank when the former owner is famous poet like Walt Whitman. Such markings, known as marginalia, can be a gold mine to literary scholars, right? So if you try to understand this, both the sentences over here are independent. The first sentence starts with typically underlines, scribbles and notes left in the margins by former owner lowers a book's value. This is an independent sentence. When the former owner from here till the end, it's again an independent sentence. So you need, if you're joining it with a comma, you need a comma and a connective with it. So it's only there in option A, which will be your answer. This will be a run-on, option C will be a comma splice error, and option D will again be a run-on. So all of these three will be eliminated, and the best answer will be option A. Moving on to question number 22. After the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes equivalent to few cents on single-use plastic grocery bags in 2011, plastic bag consumption decreased by up to 90%. Such taxes are subject to what economists call the rebound effect. As the change became normalized, plastic bag use started to creep back up. So both the sentences over here are independent. When you're joining two independent sentences, you can have either a full stop, or you can have a comma and a connective. Then you can have a semicolon, you can have a semicolon conjunction and a comma, and lastly you can have a colon if the second sentence is the reason of the first sentence. So out of these five that I just mentioned, if you look at option A, you have only a comma, which will be a comma splice. If you look at option B, you have only a connective, which will be a run-on, and if on option D you don't have a comma and you don't have a connective, so this will be a run-on as well. It's only option C where you have a period full stop, which will be the best answer over here. Moving on to the next sentence, it says, as British scientist Peter Weberly has observed, the Earth is not a very good timekeeper. Earth's slightly irregular rotation rate means that measurements of time must be periodically adjusted, specifically an extra leap second. The 86,401st second of the day is added whenever time based on the planet's rotation lags a full 9/10 of a second behind the time kept by precise atomic clocks. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of a standard English? You need to understand that what you're talking about over here, you don't need any delay, you don't need any pause. So when you don't need any pause, you don't need to add any punctuation. So it cannot be option A, it cannot be option B, and it cannot be option C. The sentence is continuing, right? So the best answer over here will be option A, and if you look at it, it is perfectly alright. Moving on to question number 24, which again looks like a verb tense question. Bengali author Toro Dutt's Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, 1876, a volume of English translations of French poems, blank its scholars' understanding of the transnational and multilingual context which Dutt lived and worked. So it is basically a period of time, and it is still doing it. So it has to be present perfect. So present perfect is when you have has or have with third form of the verb. So has and have with third form of the verb, you can have either C as your answer or you can have A as your answer. You will eliminate option D and you will eliminate option B, and out of the two you have to see which one it is referring to. So it is basically referring to a book which is singular, so it cannot be option C as well. The best answer over here will be option A. So basically it was a question that tested verb tense and subject verb agreement both. Journalists have dubbed Gil Scott-Heron the godfather of rap, a title that has appeared in hundreds of articles about him since the 1990s. Scott-Heron himself resisted the godfather nickname, however, feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to broader African American blues music tradition as well as the bluesologist, the moniker he preferred. Now, over here, if you look at it, the sentence is a continuation, and basically the however over here should have come right after this period, and it's not there, it's coming right after it, so you're not going to use a semicolon over here. It has to be a comma, so you'll be eliminating option D right after it. And again, you cannot use a semicolon after it because the next sentence is not an independent, it's a continuation of the first sentence, so you'll eliminate option B as well, right? And since it's being used as an appositive over here, because it has to be separated from the sentence, it cannot be option A as well. So the best answer over here has to be option C. Moving on, question 26, it says, from afar, African American fiber artist Bisa Butler's portraits look like paintings. They are depictions of human faces, bodies, and clothing so intricate that it seems only a fine brush could have rendered them. When viewed up close, however, the portraits reveal themselves to be kilts, stitching barely visible among thousands of pieces of print, microcut, and fabric. So, if you look at it, the second sentence is dependent, the first sentence is independent. If you join such two sentences, you need a comma between them, but only a comma. That is what you have to remember. So, if you move on with it, it cannot be A because you have a connective after a comma, it cannot be option C because you have a semicolon, and it cannot be option D because you have a full stop, right? And it can, all of these three can only be your answer if you're joining two independent sentence, which in this case you are not. So the best answer in this case will be option B because it has only a comma over here. Most conifers, trees belonging to phylum and Coniferophyta, are evergreen, that is, they keep their green leaves or needles year round. However, not all conifer species are evergreen. Large trees lose their needles every fall, right? So large trees is basically an example to what was talked about, right? Because they said that not all of them have this characteristic. So for example, it cannot be nevertheless, meanwhile, or in addition. It has to be for instance. So your answer over here will be A. Moving on. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Sam Malouf, 1916-2009, was an American woodworker and furniture designer. He was the son of Lebanese immigrants. He received a Genius Grant from John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation in 1985. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts, owns a rocking chair that Malouf made from walnut wood. The armrest and the seat of the chair are sleek and contoured, and the back consists of 7 spindle-like slats. The student wants to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Malouf. So you have to introduce who Sam Malouf was, and you have to describe the rocking chair as well. So these are the two things that you have to talk about. If you look at the options, with its sleek, contoured armrest and seat, the walnut rocking chair in Boston. So you have described the walnut chair. Boston's Museum of Fine Art is just one piece of furniture created by American woodworker Sam Malouf. So you have described Sam Malouf as well. So both the requirements of the texts are over here in option A. So this will be your best answer. You can look at other options as well. There is no description of Sam Malouf in option D and option C, and option B is not talking about in detail the chair. Now let's look at question number 29. It says, while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. In the late 1890s and over 14,000 unique varieties of apples were grown in the US. The rise of industrial agriculture in the mid-1900s narrowed the range of commercially grown crops. Thousands of apple varieties considered less suitable for commercial growth were lost. Today, only 15 apple varieties dominate the market, making 90% of apples purchased in the US. The Lost Apple Project, based in Washington State, attempts to find and grow the lost apple varieties. The student wants to emphasize the decline in unique apple varieties in the US and specify why the decline occurred. So there was a large decline, and the reason obviously was that they were not able to grow commercially. That was the reason. So if you look at it, since it's in option C, since the rise of industrial agriculture, US farmers have mainly grown same few unique apple varieties, resulting in the loss of thousands of varieties less suitable for commercial growth. So the reason and every information is over here. So the best answer will be option C. If you look at option A, B and D, they do have other information, but they're not considering all the information that has been asked about in the text, right? Now let's look at question number 30, which says, while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐭𝐚𝐜𝐭 is a multidisciplinary artist. In 1971, her first solo art exhibition, Pintorus Poemus Explicaciones, was shown at the Museo Nacional Bellas de Artes in Santiago, Chile. Her poetry collection, Precario Precacius, was published in 1983 by Tanem Press. Her poetry collection, Instant, was published in 2002 by 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐭 State Press. She lives part-time in Chile, where she was born, and part-time in New York. The student wants to introduce the artist's 1983 poetry collection. So it's only about the 1983 poetry collection, right? So you have to talk about the Tanem Press. If you look at the options, you have this name not in A, it's not in B, and it's not in D. It's only there in option C. Published in 1983 by Tanem Press, Precario and Precarious is a collection of poetry by multidisciplinary artist 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐭𝐚, right? So both the information are over here. So the best answer over here will be option C. So let's move on to the next question. Question 31, it says, while researching a topic, the student has taken the following notes. When medical students mention their patients on social media, they may violate patient confidentiality. 𝐂𝐸 led a study to determine how many medical schools have student policies that mention social media use. �KIND and her team reviewed 132 medical school websites examining publicly available student policies. Only 13 medical schools had guidelines that explicitly mention social media, and only 5 defined what constitutes acceptable social media use is. The student wants to emphasize study's methodology. So the methodology is that they reviewed 132 medical schools website examining publicly available student policies. So that is the methodology that they went for. If you look for it, the student policies of 132, so this is an information to find out how many medical schools have guidelines about social media use. 𝐂𝐸 and her team examined student policies of 132 medical schools. So this is the methodology, and this will be the answer. Again, C and D are the findings. So we have to go for the methodology. Moving on. Question number 32 is, while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. The 𝐴𝐲 are a group of African Americans who have lived in parts of southeastern United States since 18th century. 𝐴𝐲 culture is influenced by West African and Central African traditions. Louise Miller Cohen is a 𝐴𝐲 historian, storyteller, and preservationist. She founded the 𝐴𝐲 Museum of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina in 2003. Vermel Rodriguez is a 𝐴𝐲 historian, artist, and preservationist. She founded the 𝐴𝐲 Museum of Georgetown, South Carolina in 2003. The student wants to emphasize the duration and purpose of Cohen's and Rodriguez's work. So it's only about the duration and purpose. So when you talk about the duration and the purpose, you have to look at the options, and you'll find that since 2003, Louise Miller and Cohen Vermelis have worked to preserve the 𝐴𝐲 culture through their museum. So it's about time and the work that they did. Both of them are over here. So C over here will be the best answer. So moving on to the last question. It says, while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. In North America, woodlands have expanded into areas that were once grasslands. Thomas Rogers and F. Leland Russell of Wichita State University investigated whether woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. Rogers and Russell analyzed core samples from oak trees on a site that was not wooded in the past and indexed the age of trees with historical climate data to see if tree populations and climate were correlated. Tree population growth was associated with dry intervals, and droughts may have played a role in woodland expansion. The student wants to emphasize the aim of research study. So which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So they are only talking about the aim of the research study. If you look at option A, it says Thomas Rogers and F. Leland Russell, researchers at Wichita State University, wanted to know if woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. So this is what they wanted to know, right? So that is the aim of the study. That is why the best answer over here, it's going to be option A. So we are done with the paper. This is how we have to go about it. This is how we have to consider the approaches, and we have to know the rules. I would really recommend that you guys work really hard with the standard English convention questions and even with the expression of ideas questions, because they take relatively less amount of time and you can solve them with much more certainty. So if you can do that, you can spend more time. You'll get more time for the reading questions so that you can complete your paper in time and you can score, improve your score as well. So these are the two things that I would leave this video with. We'll be back with more videos. We'll be discussing more papers. I hope this helped you. If not, you can re-watch the video so that you can understand what's going on and reconcile it with the misunderstandings that you have, so that you can improve your scores and move on more confidently. Thank you so much for listening, and if you have any problem, you can mention it in the comment section and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much, guys.